Now, Andrew, if you had $50 million, what would you spend it on?
Well, there are a few. Well, actually, there's quite a lot, I guess. A home in these days. Some homes in Sydney, maybe. Yeah.
Yes. Well, it could buy you this: a private jet. It's not, however, going to get you into space. $50 million is what the government has put up to establish an Australian space agency. That's the seed money. The details will be announced in next week's federal budget on Tuesday.
Yep. Consider this, though. The total cost of NASA's Space Shuttle program was more than $200 billion. And the average cost to launch a shuttle was close to $500 million, while the cost of each shuttle was around $2 billion. That was at the time that they were put into service some years ago, which brings us to Australia's proposed space program. Now, clearly it's going to have less lofty ambitions than launching astronauts into space.
Yes, perhaps a little bit less. To explain the realities of establishing an Aussie space program, we're joined by Warwick Holmes, the Executive Director of Space Engineering at the School of Aerospace at the University of Sydney. Now, he spent 30 years in the European space industry, building 10 spacecraft, culminating in the Rosetta mission. Warwick, thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you, Jo. Thank you.
What exactly will $50 million get us?
You'll be surprised. There is a small class of satellite, which is about half a cubic metre in size, and this has been the basis of many remote sensing Earth observation missions, which they've used in Europe, for taking images of different countries. Now, Australia could build one of these spacecraft for $50 million, and we could replace the $500 to $800 million a year, which government agencies or government departments are spending to buy remote sensing imagery of Australia. At the moment, we don't own or operate any of our own spacecraft for imaging our own country. So it's like, for example, we can't take our own selfie.
Yeah.
So for $50 million, we could build, I should say, in Australia. There's a fantastic facility in Mount Stromlo in Canberra called the AITC, which is designed, ready to build this class of spacecraft.
And you're saying, in fact, that's never really been used, the testing facility at the... well, we're not going to be testing these. That's a private jet. But as far as things like CubeSats, for instance, is that what you're
okay? We have started with CubeSats. Unfortunately, they are too small for the serious applications that we need in Australia, and that's on the basis of doing so, improving GPS accuracy, taking images which are very reliable and have sufficient resolution. We need something much bigger, and that's of this order of this half cubic metre size. CubeSats have served their role, and that is to help getting us started. They don't last very long. There's been some problems getting them to work correctly, so we need to move on. And this is what the $50 million will allow.
That's a really good point, though, you made earlier about, I guess, reinforcing our own sovereignty here, is that we are relying on other countries. Even something as the weather map that we show every morning on Weekend Breakfast, that comes from Japan.
Andrew, that was exactly the example I was going to use. The ABC, all the weather images of Australia have come from overseas providers, from overseas satellites, from overseas operators. That's true of every satellite image of Australia. So we need to find a way of replacing this. We need independence, we need sovereignty, we need autonomy. That also applies to telecommunications. Now, Optus do own their own satellites. They're the very big geostationary satellites, which are very high, but there are other solutions, smaller solutions, where we can also supplement that, for example, communications for farmers. Farmers need a lot of information, for example, in understanding where their sheep are, cattle, the gate, if their gates are open or closed. And there's low data rate transmission devices which can now be received by a smaller satellite, and there's a company called Myriota in South Australia which is doing this right now. But they need more funding, and this is a fantastic announcement, by the way. $50 million is a really serious commitment from the Australian government to pursue this kind of technology.
Most developed nations would have some sort of space agency. How far behind is Australia as we're entering this stage?
We are a long way behind, okay, but this has now been addressed, and what we can do is we can jump in quite high up, in the sense that we don't have to go through that agonising, painful process of developing the technology ourselves. We can adapt a lot of the existing technology very quickly and get a far more faster economic return.
So are we at an advantage entering at this stage?
In a funny way, kind of, yes. It's like, for example, when the flat screen TVs first came out. The first ones were ridiculously expensive and not very good. If you waited a few years, you could get an LCD one, which is much, much better. So in a sense, this is what we're doing with our space agency. We've been able to look at all the other examples. the technologies and say, okay, we're going to choose specifically those technologies which are of interest to Australia. And for this to work, it has to be relevant for Australians and for the taxpayers.
Okay, so you see it's unrealistic to be building launch facilities and sending these things into space ourselves. It's about building the technology that goes into space.
Yeah, look, the example you chose was a very good one. The cost of the space shuttle and launching is ridiculously expensive, and Australia shall not be doing that. There's geographical reasons, there's technology reasons, there's economic reasons. It's a global industry. We can go and use the existing facilities and not compete with them. What we need to focus on are the applications which are relevant and specific for Australians. That's improving GPS, taking images of Australia, and telecommunications.
Warwick, the point's been made that someone like Elon Musk, an entrepreneur, can get stuff into space apparently quite easily and, well, he says, at not great cost. Just give us an example of how he's doing that and why Australia would struggle to do that.
Okay, Elon Musk is in a very, very special situation. He's in California, where there's the remnants of trillions of dollars of space industry investment for the Apollo program, for the shuttle program, which no longer exist. So there's a lot of unemployed space engineers in California, and he can swoop those up, and they have the knowledge, the experience, and the facilities for doing private space, Space 2.0, this is what they call it. We don't have any of that in Australia. That should not be the model that we use.
Well, because he's not paying them very much either.
As well.
And just finally, would you expect, I mean, there are a lot of Australian rocket scientists overseas in various programs. Would you expect now that we had this announcement, they'll come home
Absolutely,
and help?
absolutely. This has been the major problem, is that there's been a brain drain from engineers and scientists leaving Australia to go to work.
Such as yourself.
As an example, for 29 years. Okay, but now I've come back, and this is a fantastic announcement. We will then, it'll be a brain gain now. So we'll be bringing back all those people who have experience. We need experience. That's very important. So they'll be coming back from Europe and America, and they can be certainly helping us. So it's all good news.
All right, Warwick, thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you very much.